Can you think of an issue that all at once is historical, political, and spiritual? Well, one such issue is the issue of anti-Semitism, bias against the Jewish people. On this edition of Truth for a New Generation, we're going to talk about this issue. It's fascinating, it's unsettling, but it is personally relevant to you and to me, and we'll talk about anti-Semitism in depth on this edition of Truth for a New Generation. Welcome to Truth for a New Generation. Hi, Alex McFarland here. So glad you're watching. On this program, we've got a special guest you'll meet in just a few moments. But we're going to be talking about anti-Semitism. And I want to cue this up with a couple of anecdotes from recent travels, if I may. A couple of years ago, I was in Canada at a major university, and I was in front of roughly 1,000 students. And it was a talk about secularism and where do rights come from, the rights of individuals. And being an American, we know that our Constitution and great leaders throughout our history have talked about the fact that rights come from God. The role of government is not to give you rights, but to guard the rights that you have by virtue of God and the moral code written on each and every heart. But during the Q&A, talk went around to the subject of the Jewish people in the state of Israel. And one student in front of 1,000 of his peers, and there were dozens and dozens of faculty there, one student came up and began to explain that the Holocaust never happened, he said. And he rattled off a few websites that were websites devoted to questioning whether or not the Holocaust happened. Now, I was surprised the fact that no professor spoke. And I looked at all of these professors. We're at the largest university in Canada. And I asked the professors, I said, okay, this young person is denying the Holocaust. Is anybody going to call this out? And not one professor would speak. And I said to the young man, I said, well, the Holocaust did happen. And you can go to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., I would urge you, if you ever have a chance, to go to the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, and you can certainly visit many of the sites of the Holocaust in Germany, Austria, Poland, and throughout Europe. Now, why is this important? Because when a major university, and the University of Toronto is just one example, when something as historically documented and as heart-wrenching as the Holocaust is denied, and academia doesn't speak out against that, oh my goodness, we have a problem on our hands. I mean, could you imagine whether it be the manufactured history around some of the more recent social justice issues? If that's denied, there's just this firestorm of pushback. But when it comes to the rights of the Jewish people and the atrocities that Jews have suffered throughout recent and ancient history, really defense of the Jewish people is something that you're not going to find academia speaking about. Now, I want to give you the other story, and this is my visit to the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. I knew about the Holocaust. I cared on some level about standing up for the rights of Jewish people. But I was watching a film. You go through the Holocaust Museum, you'll see shoes, hundreds of shoes. You'll see children's toys. And if you visit the Holocaust Museum, it does become personal because you realize these are human beings. And you realize that these were real people, that there was a philosophy that wanted to exterminate an entire segment of humanity. This is a spiritual issue. But here is something that is etched in my memory forever. There are film clips on monitors, and film was taken. And it's just agonizing to think about the medical experiments done. I mean, the absolute barbarism and butchery of one group of humans against another. But there is a film of a cold, snowy day, and German soldiers are in thick coats because it was bitterly cold, and there's a pit where naked Jewish females are being thrown alive and buried alive in a pit. And watching that, it was so hard to watch. My heart broke. I'm stirred right this moment even thinking about it. But you imagine in a bitter cold, people naked, being put in a hole in the ground, being buried alive as just a matter of course, and as if it were just some outdoor scene. It was being filmed, and the film will break your heart. But my point is this: we can't let this be forgotten, because past atrocities and the present necessity of defending the Jewish people, this is something we need to talk about, as hard as it might be to do so. Stay tuned. More after this brief break.
Man, before I came to Charis, I was so broken.
I dealt a lot with anxiety and depression.
I didn't really realize I could have an actual relationship with God.
When I came here, I started to see God like, you know, he just wants to have a relationship with me. It totally transformed the way I look at God.
God longs to have fellowship with you.
This is where faith comes from. It's not just head knowledge, Bible school knowledge, it's revelation knowledge that changes you.
Just been set free from a lot of the bondage I was in.
I haven't been depressed in so long.
Pretty awesome having that just weight lifted and putting on Jesus' yoke.
You come here and you meet God personally, and then He gives you a whole new direction.
This is a time, this is a season of your life that God's wanting to show you who you really are and what He's wanting to do in your life.
If you have a desire for Bible college, God's the one that put it there.
If you're considering coming to Charis, I just want to say it's going to be one of the best decisions you've made in your life.
Historically, politically, spiritually, anti-Semitism is a topic that touches on many areas relevant to everybody. Hi, welcome back to Truth for a New Generation. Alex McFarland here. Got a very special guest, a colleague and a friend, EJ Kimball of Combat Antisemitism. EJ, I want to thank you for being on the program again. And hey, before we get into the topic of some history, some politics, just bring us up to speed on your vital organization, Combat Antisemitism. What's going on? What is it? And just give us an update, my friend.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on again. This is great. So I'm the Director of Christian Outreach and Engagement for the Combat Antisemitism Movement, our website, combatantisemitism.org. And we're a global grassroots movement. Okay. We've been around now for about 2.5 years. We've grown to a network of over 350,000 individuals, over 330 organizations. And what makes us unique in this space is to sort of step outside the box. We're looking to engage with the greater community. This isn't just about anti-Semitism as a Jewish problem. Anti-Semitism is a scourge on humanity. Yeah. And no matter where it exists, it's not just about the Jews, it's about the society itself and what's being tolerated within those societies. So we're working with our partner organizations. We've launched petitions and campaigns, things ranging from the Ben & Jerry's boycott on Israel. We've got a petition that we've launched on a Spanish reporter who, during an Olympic trial for Israeli athletes who, made it to the Olympics, the commentary, rather than praising the hard work ethic of these athletes, started criticizing Israel and their policy regarding Palestinians and the war in Gaza. Totally an outrageous commentary for an international sporting event. So we have big campaigns, we have small campaigns. We will help promote campaigns of our partners, and we look, as we've had discussions, for new ideas of ways to move forward. And as an organization, we work on 3 levels. From the interfaith, we work on a grassroots level, and diplomatic. We work with national leaders, international leaders. We're also working with local leaders, from mayors and city councils and law enforcement. So we're working very hard to help educate people, and not just from certain age groups. We're looking at the younger generations, the millennial generations, because this issue of anti-Semitism, as it starts to envelop someone, at a certain point, it's hard to counter it.
Yeah, it is. And you know, within Christianity, the Presbyterian Church USA, PCUSA, which is a very left-leaning denomination. I was actually at one point interim pastor for 3 years of a Presbyterian church, and I'm a very theologically conservative minister. But much to my surprise, and believe me, I spoke about this, the PCUSA said that in all of their endowments, they were pulling out any investments related to Israel, and they urged pastors to urge their parishioners to not support Israel. And oh my goodness, as one who knows my Bible and my church history, believe me, I spoke out about this. And it was just unthinkable to me that a major American denomination, and the PCUSA was not the only one, would try to punish Israel by urging people to not have any investments that would be supportive of any Israeli businesses or causes. So clearly, we've got a problem. Before I brought you on, I was sharing a story about when I spoke at a university in Canada, and a student in front of 1,000 other students denied the Holocaust really happened. And no professor present, and there were probably 6, no professor would speak to this issue. Let's talk about this. How is denial of the Holocaust, either at the pop level or even within academia, how is that an example of anti-Semitism, EJ?
So there's a few things I'd like to hit on that. Number one, on the issue of Holocaust denial, there was a poll in the United States among 18 to 39-year-olds. 23% believe the Holocaust is a myth. And I believe it's 12% had never heard of the Holocaust. Think about that. 35%, that's over a third of adults, 18 to 39, either think the Holocaust never happened or they'd never heard of the Holocaust. It's amazing. You know, when you get into the issue of Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism, there is an international definition that was created in 2016, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, IRA.
Yeah.
The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition on anti-Semitism, which lays out a concise definition, but it more importantly provides the examples to help understand what you're seeing and why it may be an example of anti-Semitism. And one of those examples is denying that the Holocaust happened. And the reason that's important is not that, so you say the Holocaust didn't happen, so why is that anti-Semitism? It's anti-Semitism because it goes into a larger issue, which is to say that the Jewish people have no right to a state of their own, especially a state in Israel, in the biblical land. And that the Holocaust was created, this myth, to provide a colonial, the European colonial Jews, to go take this land from the Arabs.
Right.
And so that's why it's an example of, it may be an example of anti-Semitism. Also to accuse Jews or the state of Israel of exaggerating or creating, you know, the story of the Holocaust is an example of anti-Semitism because it's getting to the basis that you are denying the right of the Jewish people to self-determination.
Yes. And this is important not only in terms of what's taught in classrooms and textbooks, but really this does inform how elected officials govern, doesn't it? Let's talk about, and I'm just going to say it, traditionally conservative and very often Republican candidates have been strong supporters of Israel. Democrat, more liberal, progressive, left-leaning candidates have not. Speak to the issue, if you would, of why it's important for America to be a friend to Israel, and that really should inform how we vote.
Well, there's a lot of benefits to the U.S.-Israel relationship.
Yes.
You know, most of the focus, especially from people who are looking to criticize the U.S.-Israel relationship, is on military support, and that the U.S. provides funding to Israel to support military weapons, and which the Israelis buy a lot of it from the United States, so it actually helps our businesses. But there's also other benefits from it is Israel tests these weapons in the field. So when the United States military uses it, they're already been tested against enemies, so that they can be fixed. The other part is all of the technological things that Israel has developed, whether
It
it's
is astounding,
the
isn't it?
cell phone technology, you've got the vaccine technology, you've got
Flash drives.
yeah, everything. When people talk about boycotting Israel, they don't realize if you truly want to boycott Israel, you pretty much are going to be able to hold a piece of paper in your hand. You're not going to be able to hold your smartphones.
Sure.
Those are out. All the technologies that you take for granted. Your car, which has the autonomous driving capabilities, the sensors, that's all Israeli, created.
Well, and I've just got to say this, EJ, it really is miraculous. Here's a nation that 74 years ago didn't exist, 73 years ago came into existence. After 1900 years of dormancy, since AD 70, a little backstory, Roman blitzkrieg of Jerusalem. Okay, May of 48, and again, on this show, we've done a lot of historical, as I say, the miracle of modern Israel. And now with AOL, many people, their first exposure to the internet was from America Online. That AOL disk that got people on the internet was written in Jerusalem. And you and I have talked about a lot of the technological achievements. I just think it's a miracle. In 7 decades, what Israel has become and what they've given to the world.
It is. It is nothing short of a miracle. And it's also what I believe helps push this anti-Semitism globally, is the fact that the Jewish people were conquered and dispersed for 2,000 years. And historically, when peoples are conquered and dispersed, what happens? They're gone.
It's over.
You never hear from them again. The ancient Celtic people, where are they today? They're not in some place still existing. They're gone. But the Jewish people stayed alive. They stayed together. They kept their identity. And 2,000 years later, returned to the land that God promised them.
Yes.
Returned and recreated their state. And so the world looks at Israel and the Jewish people, and there's no comparison.
Nothing.
They can't look at history to understand it.
Just a little perspective. We interviewed a man, a professor, his last name was Davies. He wrote a very famous book called Vanished Kingdoms, The Rise and Fall of States and Nations. He documents 24 world powers that once they went out of existence, it's over, never heard from again, 24. And along the landscape of history, one nation didn't exist for almost 2 millennia, and they're back. In 7 decades, have changed the world for the better, all the while having to fight to stay alive. That's why we say it is so significant, isn't it?
Yes, and that goes to the strength of the Jewish people and the Jewish people living in Israel to be constantly under threat or under actual, warfare.
Attack.
And yet still, you don't see companies leaving Israel. You see more investment in Israel. Because there is this belief that the Jewish people will survive. They will ultimately win, and the state of Israel will only become stronger through history.
Why is it in the best interest of the American people to have and to support leaders, elected officials, that believe in Israel and the right of the nation of Israel to exist and to self-determination?
Well, it's about right and wrong. It's about morality. It's about truth. The state of Israel is a force for good in the world. Amen. It's not a perfect country, don't get me wrong. And that's very important when you get into the issue of anti-Semitism and this IHRA definition, that if you want to criticize policies of the state of Israel, that is legitimate. Just like we criticize policies in this country.
Of course.
People don't like President Biden, they didn't like President Trump. You have people can absolutely disagree, but when that disagreement is going into someone's right to exist, when debates get personal, you've lost the substance of what you're talking about. You've lost that morality of a debate. And Israel is a moral compass for the world.
Oh, absolutely. We're almost out of time, regrettably, but I want to say this. I want you to tell people where they can find your website, signing the pledge, and I want, EJ, I want to encourage churches, pastors preach about this, Sunday school teachers teach on this. Have the courage to do what I believe is a right thing, a biblical thing, a Christian thing, to stand up for the rights of Jewish people and the state of Israel. How can people, through Combat Antisemitism, begin to do that?
Yeah, so you can start by going to our website, combatantisemitism.org, sign the pledge, sign up for our newsletter to be kept informed of everything that is happening in the world, good and bad, and also the events that we have going on. Also to report something that you may see in your community. And
you've got a newsletter that is phenomenal.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And that's something that we pride ourselves on, to make sure it's all-encompassing, to show the positive developments happening, because you want people encouraged. It's not just all negative.
Sure.
Because we need to fight back against the rising tide of anti-Semitism. But also on the local levels, for people to work within their community, for pastors to talk to their churches, to go to your friends and neighbors and just tell them, this happened, whether it's your community, a neighboring community, and get them involved, get them to go to the website, start educating themselves, because it's not a Jewish problem. Right. It's a problem for all of humanity.
Well said. EJ Kimball of Combat Antisemitism, thanks for being with us. And let me also say, moms and dads, know what your kids are being taught in school. Read your children's textbooks. And we're going to come back in just a moment and talk more about this subject. I want to thank you for watching Truth for a New Generation. More after this brief break on anti-Semitism and what it means to you and to me, and how we can stay informed and make a positive difference. Don't go away. We're back after this. When we come together in the name of God, we can do anything. Alex McFarland here, inviting you to the next Truth for a New Generation conference on worldview and apologetics. We'll tackle socialism, critical race theory, and a biblical response to the woke movement. Hear from Frank Turek, Sandy Rios, E.W. Jackson, Miki Addison, and more. Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, October 15 through 17. Visit alexmcfarland.com. alexmcfarland.com. I've often said that selective tolerance is intolerance. Hi, Alex McFarland. Welcome back to Truth for a New Generation. We've been talking about the subject of anti-Semitism, and I really believe more than ever it is important, vital, in fact, for the preservation of our liberties, that we understand that all human beings have worth, value, dignity, personhood, because we're made in the image of God, and that is certainly the case with the Jewish people. You know, at a time when so much is in the news about the rights and equality and diversity and all ethnicities, we who are Christians, and really all people, we've got to stand up for the rights of Jewish people, and thus the programs we've been doing against anti-Semitism. And I want to thank our guest, EJ Kimball, for being on, and again, stay informed with his organization, Combat Antisemitism. Now, as American citizens, I want to encourage us to stay informed. I want to encourage you to vote for candidates that support the nation of Israel. And if you're in a church leadership position, pastors, teachers, inform your people, because this really, really does matter. And biblically, as we've said so much on the programs, the nation of Israel is a miracle. I've often had skeptics ask me, give me a reason to believe that the Bible is of divine origin. Alex, give me one example of why you think Scripture is supernatural. Well, there are many examples I could give, fulfill prophecy, but the rebirth of the state of Israel. You know, I've talked about it many times. 200 years ago, the Enlightenment skeptics would point then to the non-existence of the state of Israel as reasons they believed that the Bible is false. But in the early part of the 20th century, the wheels began to turn, God began to work, and then in May of 1948, Israel was born. How the world really should thank God for the nation of Israel. But I want to encourage you to stand for truth, stay informed. It may be a little bit out of your comfort zone and may not always be convenient, but yes, stand against anti-Semitism and stand up for the Jewish people, because that is biblical, and that's our responsibility to do so and to speak truth.
Like no other nation, Americans have lived under the blessing of prosperity and liberty. These gifts are part of the heritage of a country grounded in the truths of Scripture and given by God to advance the gospel at home and abroad. In these days of moral and spiritual confusion, maintaining the freedom to express our faith in the public square has never been more important. The American Family Association, working to preserve religious liberty for generations to come.
Hi, Alex McFarland here. Welcome back to Truth for a New Generation. Hey, let's summarize. This is the biblical bottom line. The problem of anti-Semitism, it's academic, it's political, it's social, but fundamentally it is spiritual. I'm just going to say it. Satan hates the nation of Israel, and one of the best things we can do to serve the Lord and stand for what is true is to love everybody, of course, speak up for the rights of everybody, but especially the rights of Jewish people and the nation of Israel. That's biblical. Hey, and I want to say that, you know what? COVID has not slowed down Truth for a New Generation or Alex McFarland Evangelistic Ministries. In fact, and I give God the praise, we are doing more than ever, we're doing better than ever, and I want you to be a part of it. And I want you to say, at a time when truth is up for grabs and there is a fight for the soul of this nation and our future, we're in it to win it. And we're on the radio 7 days a week. 7 days a week, we're on the radio, we're on television, we're doing events, we're broadcasting, we're shipping out tens of thousands of resources every year, and we need your help. And I want to invite you to be a partner with us and to help us bring people to a relationship with the Lord, to spread truth, and it really is a part of what I believe God is raising up to help save our nation. So let me make you this offer. I've got a book called 10 Issues That Divide Christians. It's a book about spiritual, political issues. It will equip you to stand for truth. I'm going to send you 2 copies of this book for your tax-deductible gift of at least $50. One for you to read, one to share with a friend. If you would do this today, you can donate securely online. You can reach us at the information on the screen. 2 copies of 10 Issues That Divide Christians, yours for a gift of at least $50. If you would make that gift at least $75, I'll include our awesome Truth for a New Generation Apologetics t-shirt. You're going to love it. It's really high quality. But if you would pray, promote, support, come to the conferences we put on. You can find our touring schedule at alexmcfarland.com, alexmcfarland.com. Please know that we're grateful. Your gifts are faithfully handled, and together we're helping save our nation and spread the truth. Thank you very much.